There's no discussion of the movie Antz that won't inevitably circle around to a discussion of Pixar's A Bug's Life and the fascinating tale of spite that ultimately spawned the animation studio DreamWorks. And while it is kind of fun to study the toxic miasma that spawned one of the industry's most cynical and obnoxious giants, I feel like it kind of distracts from the point. The rivalry between Antz and A Bug's Life has always kind of offended me. Not because it does a disservice to the quality of both movies, but because the differences in quality between the two are gargantuan. Even as a child, I've always found A Bug's Life to be the single most vanilla story Pixar's ever told, with its unbearable everyman protagonist, hackneyed lie and reveal narrative, and schmaltzy moral about how we may be weak alone, but together we're strong. Its intentions seem much more hinged on being a cute, whimsical film about bug puns and family-friendly antics than really doing something interesting with its concept. Despite this, the film is still allowed to exist and be spoken about without being immediately associated with the other film that launched that same holiday season. Antz isn't just a better insect film than Bug's Life, it also has to be one of the most well-written animated films I've ever seen. Antz is a film built entirely around the philosophies inherent to being an insect, trapped in a microcosm that acknowledges you as objectively insignificant. Our protagonist is a hapless neurotic who becomes disillusioned with his sectarian society and life in which he's made zero decisions. Z's imminently relatable existential dread and immaculate performance by Woody Allen instantly endears him to the audience. On the other side of the scale, we have a princess, thrust into a position she didn't ask for and marrying a guy she didn't decide to marry. Despite being an elite, on the complete other side of the scale to the worker ant Z, she shares his frustrations, which instantly draws them to one another. In a society where jobs are assigned at birth and dancing consists of little more than synchronized shuffling, Z finally finds something that he actively wants to pursue in Princess Bala. Throughout its run, the film explores themes of self-worth, existentialism, classism, determinism, social Darwinism, all of which sound pretty similar but mean very different things, but the central thesis that runs most heavily throughout the feature is that of making choices and not being what others tell you to be. Z can only move forward when he stops listening to everyone around him and starts working in his own best interests, which inspires a wave of dangerous free-thinking ants that aggrandize Z like a prophet. Meanwhile, the film's villain, General Mandible, continuously asserts the notion that the life of one ant doesn't matter, while in the same breath assuring the audience that he does in fact value some life over others, foremost among them his own. Whether he's orchestrating elaborate false flag attacks to trim the fat of the colony, or secretly constructing a super society of elite soldiers to replace the working class, Mandible's ideology is clearly built around a colony that services him rather than a colony that services itself. From the way he audibly commends the militant precision of marching soldiers to his Nazi-esque machinations, there's a ruthlessness to this character that lends him a lot more bite than your average Disney villain. We also see this theme explored by way of Z's friend, Weaver, a confident, battle-hardened soldier ant that actually finds himself happier after swapping places and living a more humble life as a worker ant. But I think the most interesting meditation is in the form of Mandible's right-hand man, Colonel Cutter, a character that is consistently torn apart by both his burning desire to exercise some judgment on his own behalf and his deeply ingrained loyalty to the colony. Cutter functions as something of a silent protagonist, being privy to all of General's hypocrisies throughout the entire run, while justifying it to himself as simply following orders. His slow-burning distrust for Mandible and impossible to ignore ethics are a constant throughout the narrative, and he's eventually afforded a very powerful redemption. Then we have the fallen soldier, Barbatus, who functions as something of a cautionary tale for Z, representing the inevitable conclusion of a life lived in someone else's best interests, as well as the sacrifices that the weak and vulnerable make for the secure and elite. It's a sobering scene, and forever imprints in Z and the viewer the real weight of a human life, outing Mandible's claims for the falsehood they are. It's all quite heavy and political, but never in a way that feels overbearing or detracts from the film's charm. There's plenty of room to be playful with the insect concept, but rather than just throwing every visual gag in the world at us, the film remains perfectly internally consistent on a thematic level. Every reference, every allusion, and every satirical comment serves to strengthen its core thesis. When Z and Bala reach their mythical insectopia, of course there's going to be a hippie circle of woke bugs waxing philosophical by a campfire. Of course there's going to be a pair of aristocratic wasps who take pity on them as mud dwellers. Of course there's going to be a godlike presence blowing up ants with a magnifying glass. But even when it's indulging itself, the film never feels like it's reining itself in or holding itself back in the interest of being accessible to audiences, to an extent that I'm not even sure you could call this a children's film. I've seen plenty of kids films that'll throw in more adult humor or subject matter that'll fly over most kids' heads, but they usually balance it out with much more fun, silly, playful escapades to keep them engaged. Antz, on the other hand, doesn't seem to care about keeping little Timmy placated at all. While it does have a few sequences that are more dynamic and marketable, it pretty consistently maintains its distinct tone, deftly balancing its highbrow wit with its sharp socio-political satire. Just to give you some context as to why this video exists, I've owned this film on VHS for as long as I can remember, and as a little kid I must have watched it a few hundred times, so I really haven't felt too much incentive to return to it for the last decade or so. So finally revisiting it recently and watching it with fresh eyes was like waking up from a dream. I knew every word of the script, but it was like I was hearing all these lines for the first time. Like I literally had a giant paper bag over my head. There are a lot of films that I'd never stopped watching, so I never had a chance to develop that deep, powerful nostalgia, but watching Antz in 2017 was something very special that I rarely experience. As an aside, if there's an old favourite of yours that you haven't seen in like 15 years, maybe consider taking that stroll down memory lane, because it might just awaken someone in you that you thought was long dead. In the end, Zia shows us that he pretty much ended up right back where he started, but he's okay with it, because this time it was something he chose for himself, and the film comes perfectly full circle. Beyond freeing the minds of his cohorts, emancipating his colony, and uprooting the very climate that birthed him, that simple fact remains his greatest triumph. All things considered, I really don't have anything bad to say about this movie. Its writing is superb, its comedy is sharp yet understated, its score is sweeping one moment and lovingly intimate the next, and its voice acting consistently impresses. Beyond Woody Allen, I just can't stress how remarkably natural and authentic the film's vocal performances are. It's not like other kids' films where it just feels like a celebrity pretending to be a snail or something. It's not just Sharon Stone, Sylvester Stallone, and Jennifer Lopez being ants for a day and cashing their checks. They actually feel like these characters and that they belong in this world. Now maybe that's just because I heard most of their voices for the first time in this movie, but I'd like to think that a good performance holds up regardless. Actually, on second thought, I guess I could stand to criticize one aspect of this movie. You probably guessed it. It's ugly. Like, really, really ugly. If there's one regard in which A Bug's Life absolutely trumps this movie, it's definitely art design. Let's be honest, that's why it was more successful. The colors are muddy, the textures are low res, the rendered models are seriously lacking in dynamic shading, and the character designs range from mediocre to absolutely atrocious. Mind you, this was the infancy of CGI feature films, so I understand the shortcomings in this department, and it certainly doesn't take away from the film's quality, but it's there. So, in conclusion, Antz is a truly special film. Undoubtedly DreamWorks' strongest effort, and criminally underappreciated by moviegoers. Nearly 20 years of neglect and squalor, without so much as a Blu-ray release, it's a real shame. I like to think that history will see things differently, and that after all the dust is settled, Antz will finally be freed from the shackles of corporate bickering, and celebrated for the achievement that it is. Also, if I didn't make it clear before, I personally did not care for A Bug's Life.